just to kick things off, let's just start by reflecting on one simple question, and that is anything interesting happening to your organic website traffic lately?
I'd love to hear people's actual answers to that in the chat.
Right, right. So you might be surprised to find out that B2B traffic is actually up in the past few years. Actually up by about 42% over pre-pandemic levels. But for some sectors, they're not feeling it. So you can see here on this second chart, manufacturers have actually seen their organic traffic fall by more than 20%. And in professional services, it was more than 40% over the past 5 years. And a lot of that drop has just been since 2022.
Here's another number that should make you stop and think. This 37% of your marketing budget is referring to the potential for dollars spent that could be misaligned or ineffective if the audience research you're basing those decisions on isn't truly rooted in up-to-date, accurate, meaningful data about what buyers actually want, need, care about, but rather on thin, outdated audience insights. And I feel like, and tell me if you relate to this, it feels like marketing today feels like we're caught in a flash flood. Everything is moving super fast. It's very chaotic. AI generated content is coming at us like flood water does in a flash flood. It's creating new channels. Buyers have more power. They have more privacy. Third-party tracking is getting harder. And we're not setting ourselves up for success if we're continuing to use a roadmap to guide our decision-making that's built on the original terrain prior to this gigantic marketing flash flood. So we're going to talk today about some ways to level up that game you have for understanding your audience and being able to make decisions based on that. Too many clicks. Sorry. Here we go.
So just to recap, I'm Jo Phillip. I am Director of Creative Strategy here at Whiter Group, and I've been writing and working as a content manager since businesses were building their first websites and just starting to send out, marketing emails. But what I really believe is that as tech advancements continue to accelerate, tapping into human experiences is only going to become more important.
And I'm Chelsea, as mentioned. I'm the Director of Client Strategy here at Whitert. And for the last 12 years, I've really been helping marketers build really smart, intentional campaigns. I'm very passionate about making sure that you're not relying on best practices and that you're making sure you're using the data and the insights that you have about your customers in your situation, in your market, and making decisions and building marketing plans that make sense based on that custom situation. And that's really the heart of what we're going to talk about today. Curious if this looks familiar to anybody. This is what often comes of your traditional marketing buyer persona. This is something that we at Whitert have relied on for years and has been a real staple in that initial strategic approach to decision-making for what a marketing program should look like. We need to understand who we're marketing to. So we create a profile to represent that buyer so that we can reference it when we're writing content or deciding where we want to put a campaign and what platforms we're going to put it on. But the problem is, if we're being honest with ourselves, we weren't using enough reliable data-based inputs to inform these. It was a lot of vibes, a lot of anecdotal information, which is useful, but probably not enough in today's day and age with the type of data we do have available to us and the tech that's available to really inform proper marketing decision making. But even more importantly than that, these were static. These were snapshots in time. Often you created this persona profile at the outset of a campaign or the beginning of an annual planning effort, or even less frequently than that in some circumstances. And we would set it and we would either forget it or we'd reference it maybe, but we weren't updating it. And so what we need to try to move to, and what we're going to try to help paint the picture for today, is a dynamic profile that you have created operations around in your day-to-day marketing activities to continue feeding new information to and updating and diving deeper on what really makes people make decisions from an emotional trigger standpoint, understanding the context of their situations as one-to-one as possible. The tech is helping us today be able to be more customized than ever. How do we use data to get to a point like that? And I think most importantly, how do we know for sure where these buyers are really consuming content today on the internet? And that used to be a really difficult manual effort to uncover that, or you'd have to do all the testing yourself to learn for your own purposes with your own content, but that's not the case today. So we're going to paint the picture here and give you some tools and processes and an approach that will help you start moving into a dynamic audience research approach that continues to adapt and listen as things change.
So let's go back to that flash flood for a second. What you're looking at here on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side is really, this is an image of the same space, both before and after a flash flood. So what you can think about is, right now we're in the middle of it, right? We've got the water everywhere. Well, AI generated content, not water. And if you don't think we are being battered by that, you should be aware that right now it's estimated that 57% of all web-based text is either generated or translated using AI. So it is really full out there. We've got zero-click search results. We've got changing algorithms, right? Privacy regulations, and of course that fragmentation behavior in terms of where people are searching online. So if you think about it now, we've got a new landscape emerging, and that's kind of what that right-hand side looks like. It's bringing a lot of new opportunities. These are new opportunities to connect with those audiences in a much more wide-ranging environment than depending solely on them coming to that one point, your website. So think of an SEO-focused, Google-centric paradigm as that left side. Right? You're in the riverbed. It's like traffic and SEO performance. It's really easy to see there and it's easy to measure, but it's really only a small fraction of the overall landscape. And in a flood, which is where we are right now, you don't want to be in a riverbed anyway. It takes courage, it takes effort to get out and explore new terrain, but fortunately, we also have new tools to help us with that. So the first thing to think about is we've got affordable access to LLMs and user-friendly AI-driven tools that are putting deeper, more granular audience insights within our reach, within almost everybody's reach today. And that's leveling the playing field like it's never been leveled before. We've got AI-powered research tools like SparkToro, which we use, that deliver large clickstream data sets that can help us uncover hidden patterns in audience online behavior. We have these data sources now that we didn't have before, websites and CRMs. They can collect troves of data. And then data analysis from those sources, it used to be time intensive, which made it cost prohibitive, or the realm of experts, people you had to pay. Now you can upload a data set, you can ask an LLM for a few questions about that data set, and in minutes you can pull insights and go back to that data and validate the output. And get insights from that you can act on really quickly. So that ability to synthesize unstructured data like call transcripts and social media comments and customer reviews, it's bringing more human-focused details into our work. And that's enabling us to mine information sources for more robust intelligence than we were able to achieve before. And then by combining the strengths of your internal subject matter experts with those data sources and generative AI, we can put it all together. We can connect those dots to create truly valuable niche content that's going to answer buyers' questions with greater expertise and authority than all of that mediocre AI-generated content that's flooding the landscape around us. And so we're going to walk through the process of getting there. And we're just going to be scratching the surface. This is a really important thing to remember. We're talking about an approach and a framework. We're going to show you examples and we're going to move really fast. Some of this may apply to your business, some of it may not. But I can almost guarantee there's going to be something everyone can take away and go back to your desk and give it a shot. You're going to be thinking about sources you might not have thought about before, some of which you already have your hands on. We'll talk about why they matter, and we'll talk about what you might do with that information, how it might impact your strategies.
All right, this middle section here, as Jo alluded to, is going to be all about inspiration. So we're going to walk through a bunch of different data sources that you could consider incorporating into this audience research effort to really understand your customer, your audience with intimacy. And we're going to split this up into internal sources that you probably already have in-house and external sources that might require a tool or come from another place outside of your four walls. But for each example, we're going to show you what to look at specifically, what type of data, what type of information, what to look for as far as insights, what types of patterns to be looking for, what types of insights you might be able to glean. And then each one is also going to have an example prompt that you could utilize with your LLM tool of choice to really get that power behind the data analysis part of things. So we're just going to walk through some examples here and hopefully you come away inspired. Let's start with internal data sources. So these are often overlooked. We have them available, but in most cases, from our experience, they're not being used to their full potential. And these are really some of the richest, most actionable insights you can get, because this is about your customers, your buyers. This is first-party data that's specifically on your audience. It's not you trying to find a lookalike audience. It's not you trying to follow best practices and wonder if they really apply in your context. These are the types of data sources that are straight from the horse's mouth and are the most accurate and impactful. We're going to walk through each one of these and give you some ideas for specific examples. Okay, starting with CRM data. This is probably one of the most underutilized sources of data, specifically as it comes to the application of audience research and understanding your audience. We often turn to CRM data for segmentation work, right? We're looking at lists. We're looking at who do I send this email to? Or we're looking at performance. How well did this thing I did perform? But are we looking at it and asking questions of that data in a way that can tell us behavioral insights that can inform campaign decision-making in the future? Firmographic data on its own, or even just demographic data on individual contacts, that can help you nail down your ICP at a company level or really paint that kind of static buyer persona picture on a contact level. But it can be really powerful if you start to combine that information with behavioral data. Which customers moved fastest through the sales cycle? Look for patterns there. You can start to get some real aha moments when you're combining who did what did they do, and really analyzing that data. And as Jo mentioned earlier, this is only becoming easier and cheaper as the tools are advancing. Here's your first deluge of ideas. Don't get too hung up on every idea listed on these slides. You guys will all get the deck after the fact, and we're just going to focus on walking through one example. But by all means, please do take a closer look. When you get the deck, you may find inspiration buried in here that we didn't speak to. But for each one, we're going to talk into a specific example. And I want to highlight the idea of analyzing your closed lost reasons. I think often our first instinct whenever we're looking at this type of data is to look at what works best, but sometimes the best learnings are hidden in what is failing. So as an example, if you could take a look at the job titles that most often appear in your closed won deals versus the job titles that most often appear in your closed lost deals. Does that tell you something that you didn't understand that well before about who has influence on that buying committee that you're trying to sell to? Who are the roles that you're not messaging to well enough? Maybe there's something in the verticals that shows that you're really successful in closing deal velocity super fast in one vertical compared to another. Like, how does that change the percent of your budget allocation and marketing that you spend trying to reach that vertical compared to the other? So there's all kinds of things you can look for here when you're combining who did what and what they did to try to get at some behavioral data. Here's a specific example from one of our clients. This is showing the deals lost by reason. And I wanted to throw out this example prompt for you guys to consider as something that you can use to really leverage those AI-powered tools that are now available to us in a way that would have previously taken many man hours and much time and energy to do on your own. But if you had this type of data available where you could take every single deal for the last year and you've got the reason logged for why you didn't win that deal, could you feed that data into a ChatGPT or a Gemini? And could you ask it to analyze the loss reason trends over time? What patterns can it find for you? What gaps can it suggest you might have in your messaging, in your persona fit, in your buyer readiness that could change how you go to market to that segment of your audience next time? So really good example here of digging into some of the most accurate and applicable data available to you right within your own CRM. Next data source here in the internal bucket is website analytics. Now, we're not talking about performance type analytics here. We're not talking about bounce rate or overall traffic volume or things like that. But again, how do we start to connect dots to understand behavioral trends that could change the way we nurture people with different content, or change the messaging, or change the way when we want our salespeople to outreach versus when we're still doing passive educational pushes through marketing? There's all kinds of combinations of data here within your website analytics that can be really helpful. The example I want to hone in on here has to do with time on page versus exit rate. So what can you learn based on looking at a page level? I'm just going to flip right away here to the example. This is a real client example here. What can you learn by looking at a list of all of your content and sorting it by average engagement time per session? So how long people are on that page, and comparing that to how often people then leave your website after reading that content. And what can you indicate? What can you learn from that indication then? So for this particular example, we've got this blog on the top here that has the highest average engagement time per session, but also at the same time has the high exit rate. So what does that tell us? In this scenario, it's telling you that this particular topic is not actually geared toward our buyer itself. It's geared toward an influencer, and it's more, the objective of that content is more about brand awareness and amplification than it is about lead generation or nurturing. So just having that understanding, and in this case, we kind of knew that going in, but you can find unknown examples here, and you could find a piece of content that when you made it, you thought perhaps that it was going to be a lead generating type of content. And then you might find data like this and say, wait a minute, am I not getting this in front of the right audience? Is it actually an angle that's speaking more to an amplifier or an influencer than a buyer? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but having that understanding to then measure against the right things and to deploy that content in the right way is very important. So here's an example of maybe some different or unique ways to take a look at website analytics for the purpose of how do I better understand my audience and adjust my marketing tactics accordingly. All right. Voice of customer. So this has got to be one of my favorites. This is the most emotionally rich and the most underused information source, as we've seen from experience with our clients. And when I say voice of customer, you know, this is kind of a trendy buzzword, but what I mean when I say it is any anecdotal data, any quotes, any straight from the horse's mouth type of feedback that you can gather from your clients, whether it's written, whether it's in a call transcript, whether it's coming from a review site, for example, which we'll dig into more specifically later. But this is not only the formal voice of customer type program you might think of, where you're soliciting reviews and testimonials and doing CSAT surveys, but this could be something super simple. And I'm going to get into one of those examples right here. Have you ever considered your form submissions to be part of your voice of the customer? Traditionally, that doesn't really fall under the definition when we think of voice to customer. We think of those things like CSAT surveys that we're specifically going out and soliciting. But if you have a form on your website, for example, where there's a free form field as part of that form, are you taking a look beyond just when that individual submission comes in and you have to do the intake that comes in from that submission, whatever they needed? Are you ever looking at those collectively and analyzing those free form fields for trends? Are you looking at that to say, we're not educating enough about XYZ part of our process? Everybody's coming and asking these questions at a point in our buyer journey in which we're intending them to be sales ready. There's lots of great insights that are coming, again, straight from the horse's mouth, not to overuse the phrase, but it's so applicable, out of form submissions. So an example here, we did just that with one of our clients, and we exported all of the form submissions from their bottom of the funnel kind of quote outreach form. And we dropped that all into ChatGPT, and I said, take a look at these form submissions. What patterns are emerging that buyers are still struggling with something and still have a question or a concern at a point in their journey when we're expecting them to be ready to be quoted by sales? And what types of content could we create in order to prevent that from occurring again in the future and speed up that process to get those folks handed over to sales? So I really love this one. Form submissions is one great example of this. Call transcripts is an excellent example of this. If you're not recording sales and service calls, please start tomorrow. There's free tools available that can have you doing that right off the bat. And just imagine the information, the data, the power you can have by creating a process where all of your sales and all of your service calls get recorded, and all of that is automatically ported into some LLM system of choice. And you've got things that you regularly prompt of that information, and you're constantly learning and gathering and coming up with new ideas directed exactly by your customers. Cannot overemphasize the potential power there. All right, last internal data source is SME knowledge. So your subject matter experts inside your four walls. Sometimes there's barriers to being able to really capture voice of customer first party. Sometimes your IT and your legal are very strict and they won't let you record your calls. Or sometimes it's just not the operationalizing of being able to speak with those customers isn't there yet, or they're not willing. Sometimes there's we've run into this a lot where there's just strict protocols in some verticals where they're not allowed to speak. They're not allowed to give reviews. You're not allowed to attribute testimonials, and it just becomes difficult. The next best thing is learning from the person that did talk to that person, right? So your salespeople, your service people, your engineers, the people who build your product, anybody who's interfacing on a regular basis with your customers, with your prospects, you need to be harnessing their knowledge, and it needs to be done in an operationalized way, not just a water cooler talk. Hey, I learned a cool thing from engineer Tom today, but how in your marketing program can you operationalize incorporating them, having content workshop brainstorms, having them send you regular feedback on certain things? It needs to become a regular part of your marketing program so these personas and this audience research can continue to grow and learn and adapt over time. An example here that we do very often for our clients is running a workshop specifically to get all those SMEs in one room and really probe and prompt them and start to ask them questions about what they're hearing, what they think will move the needle for customers today, what's trending, what matters, and just having that conversation, setting aside the time and enabling that knowledge share to flow in a way you can really then capitalize on that experience is by leveraging those LLM tools, taking those transcripts and dropping them in and saying, hey, analyze this for me. What are the most common buyer questions, misconceptions, priorities coming up? What themes should I utilize for the next year to shape my content marketing messaging based on what we've heard from those SMEs on the ground? This can be a really quick, easy way to build an entire content calendar. We have built out content calendars in a matter of hours just using this type of process where we spend an hour and a half with SMEs of a client. You really lean on those LLM tools to find the patterns for you and start to synthesize and give you themes and ideas. Obviously, you go through and vet all that, as you always should with these AI-powered tools, but in a matter of a day's worth of work, if that all happened in one day, right? A day's worth of work, you've got enough content to fill your whole next quarter at a minimum. So the power here is just can't really be overstated, to be honest with you. So that's a fun one. And with that, we'll be on to some external sources.
Right. So that's what's interesting, right? You've probably already gone through enough information that you could easily build out a massive editorial calendar just using the sources that you've already gone through. But we're going to switch from that more introspective look over to the external opportunities, and that adds another layer of data and more perspectives. So we're going to walk through SEO research, we're going to walk through online reviews, clickstream data, and social listening. And again, just like with internal, we're going to look at what you should look at, what you might look for, and how you can use AI to get there faster. Okay, and we're going to start with SEO research. So again, in this case, we're not thinking about SEO research in the traditional sense. We're thinking instead more intentionally about the people and their behaviors behind the data in the SEO. So again, you've got some ideas about what you can look at and what to look for, but we're going to think here about top queries by impression versus clicks. And what that's going to help you understand is what kind of questions your content, you're getting close to answering, right? You're appearing in the SERP, you're there, they're seeing that your content exists, but you're not answering it compellingly enough to get that click. So here, what you could do is export the data. You can see we've got high impression, low click-through rate queries. Upload it to LLM of your choice and ask it to organize your high impression, low click-through rate search queries into buckets and identify which questions we rank for, but don't address well enough to compel those searchers to want to click through. So Chelsea alluded to reviews because, again, it's that unstructured, really from the heart, emotional kind of information that you can get. But public-facing reviews are a little different from your voice of customer in that they're offering you an opportunity to harvest raw language and to spot patterns from buyers and their peers directly. And because we know that people generally trust their peers more than they trust brands or marketers, you can often get less guarded, more candid feedback from reviews than you might get from other sources. So what are you going to look for there? So we're talking about customer reviews, right? Things like you'll find on G2, obviously Reddit, lots of long conversations going on there. You want to look for complaints or praise about competitors, specific feature mentions to find out what's important. But when we're looking at reviews, in this case, we're trying to home in on those differentiators that your buyers care about most. So how are you going to do that? And actually, this is even easy. This is so easy. So you can go to a review site, like go to G2, you can filter, to get exactly which reviews you want on the page. And it can be, depending on your LLM, as easy as giving it a link to that page and asking it the questions. Now, in this case, we're asking from these G2 reviews of our product and our 2 top competitors, extract recurring buyer expectations, unmet needs, and the language they use for key features, and recommend the tone and differentiators we should emphasize in our content. Now, remember, are you going to get something that is absolutely perfect and you don't have to do any refinement? Of course not. But it is going to give you some really meaningful information and ideas that you might not have known and would have been otherwise too hard for you to sift through 250 reviews to get yourself. So our next source is clickstream data. Clickstream data refers to the recorded sequence of links that a user on a browser clicks on. So that way you're getting a view of the exact path that a user follows from page to page as they're navigating the internet. What are you looking at and what are you looking for when you're digging into these audience intelligence platforms? Now, in our case, we use SparkToro, and what it does is it aggregates and serves up that clickstream data to make it easier for you to identify your audience's most trusted sources of information online. And that's influencers they follow, the podcasts they read, the blogs they consume, the video channels they prefer, social accounts they follow, and you can get an idea of that overlap with adjacent brands. So you're really looking to try to find out where are they getting that information before they're coming to your website with that intent to purchase or to at least get much closer to a sale. So, and it's, I have to say too, these tools are fun to use. They're super user friendly, and they come with a lot of user instruction that can be really helpful too in their knowledge base. But what you see here is some of the results that we received from SparkToro after a search on police chiefs. So if you look at the upper left there, what that is a graph that describes police chiefs' use of social platforms as compared with the general population of the US. You can also see topics that have a high affinity with people who have police chief in their social media bios. You can see a few subreddits that are very commonly read by people with this bio profile, and podcasts that we know are very popular. So you can actually take a full SparkToro data set and export it. And you can simply prompt it. You can ask your LLM to distill it into the key values, tone, and influencer signals that you should be thinking about for campaign messaging. And there's so much more that you can ask. You can find out, just for starters, you can get an idea about trade publications that you might want to target to get your brand and your name on more sites and in more locations. And that's going to help, raise your brand awareness, but also improve your visibility in search results. And next we have social listening, which is obviously a very rational next step after using an audience intelligence tool, because it's really good to know where people are going in your audience, but it's even better to actually go there yourself and listen and pay close attention to find out what they're talking about and be that fly on the wall, because it's a really unique opportunity. Of course, doing that can be it can be pretty labor intensive. So you can find ways to use AI to help you sift and sort through the massive walls of text that you might otherwise be having to read through that comprise things like, LinkedIn posts and Reddit threads. But the things that you can learn are really unique in that you start to get a feel for kind of the vibe of an industry, the way people talk, the way they treat each other, their expectations in terms even of service interactions. You can find out what's really taboo in that industry that you might need to maybe think about avoiding until you have a deeper understanding. You might hear sort of the, I can't believe they thought I would XYZ. You could get some really good stories about pain points, things people won't talk about on sales calls. And you can find out what people react poorly to in terms of messaging trends. And so how do you dig into that? Well, in this case, we simply we can simply provide actually a link to a Reddit thread, right? So you can choose the Reddit thread or choose whatever it is that you are trying to access, and you can provide a link and ask it to analyze it for common messaging themes, for buyer skepticism, which values or tones foster trust or provoke backlash. You can ask it, what are the top 5 problems that people mention in this thread? Really, it's like having a little conversation with the participants without taking some of those risks involved in actually engaging with the conversation, because you don't want to just jump into Reddit and start asking and answering and ending up overstepping boundaries far too quickly. But yeah, you can spend some time doing some semi-automated social listening and really start getting a feel for the people who are in the industry. And so next comes the work of taking all of those insights from all of that data and connecting those dots to optimize your strategy and finally really reach and connect with your audience. So just to recap, we're thinking about this in a sort of recursive, right? It's a flywheel and layered way. So we start with our internal data insights, then we layer on those external data insights. We use AI as a tool to help us get where we need to get faster, but then we always apply our human brains to discern and to prioritize and to make the really important strategic decisions.
I think the other important point to emphasize here is that while we walked through individual examples and really tied, you can look at this data and learn this insight, we're not necessarily recommending in most cases that you immediately move to action from one single data point or one set of data, one insight, go take an action. How this becomes really powerful, and we'll illustrate this with a full example beginning to end in a moment, but how this becomes really powerful is then using, again, those AI tools to take all of those data sets that you looked at individually and start to synthesize all of those learnings together. Because just because you're learning one thing in a Reddit thread, but you're hearing something else in your form submission data, but then the story of how people are navigating through your website might be a little bit different. You need to put all that together and look at it as one cohesive buyer journey, because as humans, we don't interact via single circumstances, right? Our buyer journeys are a giant web of mess. And what we need to do as marketers is try to find the patterns across all of that to make sure that we're putting the right things in the right places that make sense in the context of where people are at in their journey. So long story short here, the point is that that's the next step as we move into strategy, is to really start to bring all of these insights together and see what you learn by that compilation.
And just to recap on the why behind it, is that it's all coming together to help you optimize your tactics and channels, right? To make sure you're shifting to where your audiences are already active, rather than forcing some kind of fit into your own funnel. You're going to choose the right content topics and formats that are answering real life concerns, real life questions that your customers have. You're going to be refining formats so that you're meeting their consumption preferences. If somebody hates video or can never listen to anything, they're going to want something that's print. If somebody never wants to read a PDF ever again, maybe they prefer video, but you need to deliver the consumption to their consumption preferences. You're going to refine messaging using their real customer language, their values. You're going to reflect their experiences and pain points. And you're going to reflect the norms of that industry. And of course, you're going to distribute that information where they already are. You want to find those platforms and you want to try to get your content in their hands. And that means going to them, because less and less they're coming to you.
All right, let's walk what this looks like from beginning to end in a real client scenario to really bring it all together. So just as a recap, what this whole audience research process looks like is we find the data that makes sense for what we're looking to accomplish, evaluate what we have that's the highest quality of data, that's going to be the most impactful to answer the objective we're looking for. We're going to find the insights we can find from that data. And then from that, we're going to make decisions about what we want to do with our marketing, where we want to spend time and budget, what types of all the things Joe just walked through, start to make those decisions based on what we found. So that's kind of the big picture. And when you get down to really doing this in real life, the one thing I want to overemphasize is that it all has to start with objectives. If you're super, super new to this entire concept of gathering this type of data and analyzing it and learning from it, sure, go ahead and just pick one that sounds interesting or applicable and play around with it and experiment and learn how to use the AI tools well in a meaningful way that gets you something useful. That's totally fine. But when it comes down to I'm ready to do my audience research that's going to then influence my marketing plan and all of my decisions, you have to start with objectives. So before you dive in, just start learning things. What is it that you need to understand? Like, what gaps in knowledge do you have today? What decisions do you need to make about your marketing that you need data to back up your decision making on? Start there with the objectives first, and then you'll start to figure out which data sources make the most sense, because you're not always going to do all of them. We gave you a dozen examples. You're not going to need to do all of those all the time. That would be a crazy amount of time and budget to do on a regular basis. But if you have good objectives set forth, you can hone in on the sources that make the most sense. You can put in the work to operationalize the collection of the data that's most meaningful to you, and then you can move into an action plan that's going to move the needle. So want to overemphasize starting with objectives. In this particular client example, we were working on audience research for them, and the objectives that we needed to understand, there were quite a few. We wanted to know exactly who do we need to create content for. And this sounds really obvious, but this is a question that has to do with going beyond that buyer. We needed to understand what's the entire ecosystem of people who could influence the deal, who could amplify our message from a brand awareness perspective, interact with our brand, represent our expertise. This could be internal champions, industry partners, employees, job seekers. We needed to have a really good understanding of who exactly we were looking to create content for. So that was one question we went into this process hoping to answer. Another one was understanding which topics and formats resonate most once we have those audiences identified. What's going to keep them engaged? How is that different from one audience segment to the next, or from an influencer versus a buyer versus a job seeker? All of those types of things. What helps them progress in their particular journey, and what builds trust for them? In this scenario, it was really important that we understood how to become not just a provider of the equipment that's sold, but an expert in the entire process that this equipment is part of, and therefore a true thought leader in the space. In order to figure out how we were going to go about that larger goal, we needed to understand what types of content themes would best position us as that type of thought leader in this space. In this case, it's packaging automation, more so than simply somebody who provides equipment that does packaging automation. So that was one other objective. And then lastly, we really needed to hone in on, we can come up with who we're going to write to and create the greatest things for them to interact with content-wise and say all the right things. But if we don't know where to put that content so that it gets interacted with, none of it really matters. So there was a large emphasis in this project on understanding the distribution strategy. As I mentioned earlier, we did not use 12 different data sources based on the objectives of what we needed to know, combined with what we knew about the quality and accuracy and amount of data available to us based on what was set up already within this client's four walls and what we had access to as their agency partner. We honed in on these 4 data sources as the key inputs into making these decisions. So we really took a look at SEO research for them, because they have been a long time content creator. So there was performance and behavioral insights to be had in understanding how people have interacted in the past with the content that they have created. Where have they seen success before? We needed to build on that. Clickstream data was very important for them because they didn't previously have a ton of insight that was really telling you with accuracy where their audience consumed content. So we did a lot of SparkToro work in this audience research effort to understand where exactly we should be promoting our content on which platforms, and also identifying collaboration opportunities with other existing entities within the space. So other partners like were forums that people are having conversations with industry experts and publications that already have a presence that people respect in the space. That all can come out of clickstream data as well. Voice of customer, always important. I would recommend trying to do whatever version of that you can in every audience research project, because it just doesn't get more genuine and authentic than that. So that was a huge input here. And then SME knowledge. This is a company with a lot of very engaged engineering folks. The folks who are working on the products themselves are very knowledgeable, and they are not afraid to interface directly with customers and prospects. So they had a lot of knowledge to share. So we did a workshop with those guys as a data source into this audience research effort. Quick example then of some of the insights we drew from doing all of those input efforts and then bringing all of those things together into one kind of knowledge source and looking for those patterns. Something we drew from this is that people understood very well what they were capable of producing from an actual product standpoint, but they didn't have a reputation, and the market wasn't as familiar with them as having that level of expertise they wanted as a true thought leader and just knowledge expert in that space of packaging engineering. So that was one insight a pattern we found across all of the data sources that we looked at. Secondly, we understood that engineers and plant managers are one of their key buying personas. And we did find, based on the way they interact, a lot of this came from clickstream data, the way they act on the internet, they will consume content even when they're not in buying mode. Sometimes that's not the case, depending on the persona. Sometimes they're just not the type of person who is seeking out extra knowledge unless there's a really good reason for them to go get it. That wasn't the case here. Like, this is a knowledge seeking type of audience. They do engage with industry forums, industry publications, things like that already. And so we had the data evidence to back up putting budget and effort toward creating more top of the funnel content that might not be geared towards somebody who's actively ready to make any sort of buying motion.
And I would add there too, I think one thing that you found was a lot of the content that they need is content to help them solve problems, right, that they're dealing with in their day-to-day. And that, like, it just dovetails perfectly with the expertise that this particular client has in-house. We know we learned, right, that it's information they're hungry for, and we can give it to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think I have something close to that a little bit farther on the list. That's a perfect segue. This is kind of a given here, this third insight, but we need to show up where the conversation is happening. So again, understanding where are the places that attention is already being spent and paid by this audience, and how can we just join that versus trying to build another outlet that they need to go and spend their time accessing that's brand new. So how can we do things on LinkedIn, on YouTube? How can we do cross promotion and collaboration with, in this case, entities like Packaging World, PMMI, the places that already have authority in this space and these personas are listening to? This was kind of what Joe was alluding to earlier. We also uncovered that the type of topics and themes that we wanted to talk about in our quest to be that thought leader and that knowledge provider in the space is that our engineering audience, they don't want like fluffy trend type information. They don't want to know like what's going to be happening with AI in my space in 5-10 years. Based on their responsibilities and their day-to-day job, they need hands-on, no-nonsense insights, and they're talking about things they could use to solve a problem today that they have in their space. So that comes back to the practical advice of using their service techs to share insider data on what they look for when they come in to help service a problem. Like, this is what we do, this is what we look for, go try it before you call us, type of thing. So that was some inspiration for the types of content topics that we wanted to create. And then the last insight here was that as far as a buyer journey is concerned, trade shows are a huge touch point today for this audience, but we need to make sure that the conversation doesn't end there and that it's not a disparate touch point, that it's weaved in the same messaging that people experience at a trade show as they do when they're interacting with the brand before and after. So those are some examples of insights that were distilled from the entire compilation of all of that data work we did. It wasn't necessarily, oh, we looked at SEO research and there's super high volume for this particular keyword, so now I'm going to make a decision based on that data point alone to go create this type of content. It was taking that whole picture, putting it all together and say, okay, what is this telling me that I'm confident, that has multiple data points behind it to say I should spend my time and budget, which is finite, right, on this effort. So it just gives you another degree of confidence as well. This is a little bit review at this point, but the next step from there obviously is then the strategic decision making based on those insights that you derived from that data. And in this case, it was making decisions on these are our content themes that we're going to write on for the next 3 to 6 months. We're going to emphasize utilizing first-party sources. So we're really going to have an interview and an SME involved in the creation of every piece of content. This influenced our decisions on where we're going to distribute. We're going to invest in LinkedIn. We're going to invest in YouTube based on what we've seen our audience doing and paying attention to. And we're going to make concerted efforts and put time and budget behind establishing collaboration opportunities with those industry players that are already respected and listened to. So that's kind of a little bit of the journey of how you can get from I'm looking at this data to I think I've come to these conclusions to now these are the decisions I'm going to make for my marketing based on that.
And there is no such thing as a long list of things to do without a short list of things not to do. So here are a few don'ts, right? There are some pitfalls that can get between you and your goals when you're working with this data. AI and automation are very powerful, but without your critical thinking and your human empathy, it's pretty hard to turn data into a winning marketing plan. So few reminders. One, remember, you are staying audience-centric, not opinion-driven. So don't let your assumptions override evidence that you find. Your most elegant strategy is going to fall apart when you assume you know what the audience wants, rather than paying attention to what they demonstrate they need. Second, balance your data approach. You want to avoid over-reliance on one single data source, and you also want to avoid overwhelming yourself with all of the data. So think intentionally about what you're curious about before jumping into the data. Remember to adopt a continuous learning approach. It's not a one-time exercise. This is recursive. This is ongoing. This is a flywheel. Markets evolve, right? Things change. Preferences shift. Platforms emerge. All kinds of things happen. So go back to it, refine it, update it, and see what it tells you next time. It might be something different. And remember to always add human value beyond AI. We are inundated with AI-generated content that is totally undifferentiated, and your competitive advantage comes from your human insight. It comes from authentic expertise, and it comes to genuine connection to those customer pain points. So remember, AI is your tool, but it is certainly not a replacement for doing that human thinking and finding the human elements in it that really resonate with people. Okay, that's it. Get to work. Actually, remember, audience research is research, and even if your data sources start out unstructured, you still need to take a methodical approach to jumping into this. So you start by defining your research objectives. What specifically do you want to learn or understand more clearly? Second, you're going to identify your data sources. Start with the things you have easy access to, and then ask yourself what might still be invisible to you, and go from there. Number 3, after you've gathered and analyzed your data, you want to review the insights they reveal and then prioritize that based on impact on your plan. You want to consider impact versus effort and resource allocation, of course. 4, be thoughtful and be reflective about the ways your new insights could change your strategy. And finally, you have to figure out your own feedback loop cadence. Are you going to be doing this monthly, quarterly? How often are you refreshing your data? Can you automate any of that? Thinking about your performance review, right? You want to look at how things are working and play out some experiments if you have budget to do that. See what you learn. So moving forward, remember, data-driven audience research, it's not It's not optional anymore. It's really important. And 37% of your marketing budget, its effectiveness might really depend on it. We know buyers spend a lot of time researching everywhere else online before they come to your site with the intent to purchase. And we know that AI's transformation of content creation has really raised the bar for quality. So your path from data to action, it's going to depend on identifying patterns and affinities in that data, and then connecting those dots, and then thinking critically about what that evidence tells you. But with intentional and thoughtful AI use, we have access to such better, more data-informed insights than we ever have before. We'd be foolish not to try to find them. So take your first step and start with the data that you already have today. And here you can scan this QR code to download a tip sheet that is going to walk you through the whole process that we just went through, but in much greater detail with more resources. And of course, I hope you'll reach out to us and share your own discoveries as well.
Mary also put the link in the chat, so you don't have to like pull your phone out to scan your laptop screen to be super meta with your technology. You can just put the link in the chat.
And now we're open for questions if anybody has any. We've got
in 60 seconds, right?
In 60 seconds.
We really took it up to the wire.
You guys nailed it. You packed so much information into this 1 hour. So I'm sure everybody's going to want the video and the deck so they can dive in deeper. There is one question that's very broad, so I think it might be hard to answer quickly, but how does data and content help on marketing campaigns? Because that's so broad, maybe there's like one quick win or one aha moment for you guys that you've learned.
Well, I would say data is important because it's real, right? It's real evidence that can drive meaningful information. Yeah. As for content, nothing happens without it.
I mean, there's the chance that you could find something in behavioral data that spins up the entire concept for a campaign. You could find that, oh my gosh, people are really getting stuck at this point in my buyer journey between looking at spec downloads on my website and then reaching out to sales. They're missing some larger piece of information there, and then they're always asking about it. That could spur an entire campaign in and of itself.
True.
So, I mean, the possibilities are endless, which is what makes the question hard to answer.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that person may have joined a little late as well. So just a reminder, if you missed anything or you want to revisit anything, you could do that in the recording. We'll also send out a PDF of the slides. So there was a lot of ideas in there of how you could use data in various ways. A lot of ideas you guys covered. So thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.